Good morning, beautiful children. Happy last day of school. I am going to read the last two chapters of the Birchbarck House, which is not very long. We have been following the life of little Omachias as she has gone through her year. We started in the fall, went into the winter, which was very hard with lots of hunger and sickness and death, and now we're into the spring. And when we read the other day, we read about the sugaring and how her people had, during the spring, gone and they had collected sap from the maple trees and were turning it into maple sugar, so little sugar snack type things for them. So, very awesome. We also know that Omachias seems to have a special gift of being able to relate to the animals. So today we're going to read One Horn's Protection. Remember, One Horn was the deer that they killed when they were starving, and they felt like the deer had given his life to them so that they could continue living. And they gave him great honor by taking the tobacco and sprinkling it on the ground near the deer before they killed him and after they killed him. So let's find out. I'm wondering what this is about. So One Horn's Protection. Here we go. This was such a good sugaring year, said Father. We'll be able to pay off most of our bill at the trader. Oh, I want to come, yelled Pinch. Father was loading his big pack frame with um, bound packets of sugar. There was much, much more than they would use all year. Old Tallow had her fill of sugar too, and Grandmother said that in all of her memory there had never been a sugar year like this one. At the trader's, Father paid off the winter's debt and bought a length of blue broadcloth for Mamma to sew into a dress. He bought Pinch some calico trim for a pair of moccasins and a piece of velvet cloth for Angeline to use as she wished. For Grandma, sewing needles and a cup of shining copper. For Omachias, he bought a small cross stamped out in German trade silver. The night Father gave her the cross, she sewed it onto the front of her dress. The crow loved to look at it and tried constantly to pluck it from her dress. He landed on her shoulder over and over and nearly hung upside down, trying to peck it with his beak. In the morning, the crow greeted Omachias with fluttering wings, ducking his head to accept a little scratch, cooing with a sweet and gurgling sound. Omachias had never heard a crow make such a sound before, and she knew it was a special sign of affection. She was certain of it one day when the crow hopped toward her with the twig in his beak. She carefully took it, thanked the crow, and laid the twig aside. All that day, wherever she turned, there was the crow, hopeful, carrying a piece of bark for her. At last Omachias scratched the crow's neck and sat down to feed him and talk to him. He listened, his lids closed, blue, his head tucked down in quiet bliss. You want to make a nest with me, don't you? Said Omachias. I can't. I love you, but I am not a bird. She was surprised to find that, as she said this, tears formed in her eyes. The crow loved her so much. You will find another crow, she said very gently. The crow did not hear. Still, after that, he would leave for hours at a time. Now Omachias was afraid that he would be taken for a bird and shot or killed. She attached a bit of red wool to his leg. The crow managed to pull it off with his clever beak. He could untie almost anything if he worked at it long enough. One day Omachias was working just outside the cabin in the cool air, watching a fire that Grandmother had made to smoke some fish that Father had caught just as the ice broke. There was a sudden harsh cawing of crows. A group of wheeling, excited black birds passed overhead. Just like that, without goodbye, the crow jumped off her shoulder. He flew, zinging, upward into the midst of the flock, and in a second he was indistinguishable from the other crows. Oh, Machias felt her heart squeeze shut painfully as the birds passed out of sight. He was gone. Maybe she would have to cut away essential feathers from his wings, but she couldn't stand to think of him as a captive. No, she decided, though that her heart hurt, it was better that he join with his own kind. He was not human, no matter how often He would now, no matter how often he said, "Stop, Pinch," or greeted her at the door, croaking, "Hello, hello," the crow stole and hoarded bits of red and bright cloth, and shiny metal shards. He was not a human. He was still a crow, and she could not unchange that. She could not change that any more than she could change being who she was. Okomias, who heard the voices of plants and went dizzy. Omachias, who talked to bear boys and received their medicine. Omachias, who missed her one brother and resented the other, who envied her sister. Omachias, little frog, whose first step was just a hop. Omachias, who had lost her friend. She thought that she had cried all of the tears that she had left to cry, but still she found there were some left for the crow. Omachias put her hands on her face and sobbed until she felt just enough better. After that, she thought, the crow was wild, and she had always known it, always expected this moment to come when he would leave. The thought comforted her. There in the yard, looking into the heart of the fire, Omachias suddenly experienced a strange awareness. Like Crow, she couldn't help being who she was. Omachias in skin, in this place, in this time, nobody else, no matter what. She wouldn't ever be another person, or really know the thoughts of anyone but her own self. She closed her eyes. For a moment she felt as though she were falling from a great height, plunging through the air and blackness, tumbling down with nothing to catch at. With a start of fear she opened her eyes and felt herself gently touched down where she was in her own body here. So that is the end of the first chapter, my friends. So the crow has gone with other crows like him, and it was very sad for our sweet girl, right? So the last chapter is called Full Circle. I'm wondering why they would call it Full Circle. Let's read to find out. I'm wondering if it does have something to do. We started the book in the fall, went through the winter, came to the spring. Well, I guess we started with the summer. Went to the summer, then the fall, then the winter, and now it is spring. And I wondered if it will come all the way around back to the summer. Let us read to find out. Now once again the family was building the Birchbarck house, moving out into the woods, dragging pots and other provisions out to the fishing camp where they would live. While she sewed mats together, the rest of the willow poles, Omachias often experienced the haunting sense of things that were missing. She thought she'd forgotten something or someone, and then of course she remembered. Niwu and Ten Snow had left big holes in her life, and the crow a tiny one, black as pitch and hoarse with laughter. Although spring, with all the force of its poised new growth, called to her, although the tender new buds opening magically touched her heart, there would be... Whoops, sorry about that, kids. There would always be a shadow to her laughter, a corner of sadness in her smile. All day Omachias and her grandmother worked hard, retrying the intersections of last year's willow frame. Grandmother cut new bark, made fancy overlaps, and even arranged a vision flap. As soon as the house was finished, when there was no way left for him to help in any way at all, Albert Lepore came by for a visit. After everything else was done. His round stomach had flattened out a trifle from the starvation winter, but he was by no means thin. He was excited. As usual, he had a vision, only this time he seemed to think that it was something very, very special. It was so amazing that he couldn't contain himself from blurting it out all out at the fire in everyone's presence. "I have a new spirit helper," he declared, his voice loud and pretentious. "Oh?" Father said in an exaggerated sound of surprise and sat back, filling his pipe. Fishtail smiled in good humor and made the gesture towards Lepore that meant, "Please, please do continue." Puffing out his chest, raising his voice to an important pitch, Albert commenced his history. "I admit to you that this occurred because of evil in my heart." "Oh, really?" said grandmother, her voice amused. "And you, a man of such true virtue?" Yes, I know, I know. Lepore waved his hands modestly as if to sweep away his incredible imperfections. Everyone then waited expectant for Lepore to continue. Of course, having caught their interest, he puffed long in concentration to draw out the suspense. I was thinking about taking, well, actually stealing one of old Tallow's traps, said Lepore. He put his hands up in the sound at the sound of Mamma's outrage. Wait, wait, he said to Mamma, hear me out. She glared, but gave him the courtesy of her silence. She owes me a good trap, protested Lepore. I gave her 2 skins once. 2 skinny muskrat skins, muttered grandmother, but she hushed herself. So I went to her house when she was gone, said Lepore, to remove a trap from the lean-to where she keeps them. That's when it happened. What? Pinch said breathlessly. Please be silent while I tell my story, Lepore admonished. It is powerful, I know, but you must respect my relationship with the winged ones, and listen closely. Well, get on with it, then. We're listening, said Father, straining to keep laughter from bursting out of his voice. Here's what happened. Lepore made a final puff and drew himself up into his most solemn height. Unfortunately, whenever he pulled up his shoulder, his round belly popped out in a comical arch. Nevertheless, he went on. I was approaching the house. I was putting out my hand. I was choosing the trap that I would take. Go on, said grandmother, grim with protective fury for her friend old Tallow. Anyway, said Lepore, I was about to close my fingers on the trap when I heard a voice. Nobody really wanted to encourage Lepore, but at last Angeline could not constrain her curiosity. What did it say? It said, Lepore, as he leaned forward and fixed them all with his keenest, slightly cross-eyed stare. Guile! In other words, the voice said, not to do what I was doing. I opened my eyes. My friends, a crow was sitting there, its eyes black and shiny as lake stones. My friends, it spoke to me. Aheen, it said, aheen. I answered, Guile! It warned me off again, and then it flew off. Poor sat back and folded his arms across his chest. He waited for the sounds of amazement and the hushed tones of respect. He waited for the nods from Father and the serious expression of wonder from Mamma and No Machias. Instead, after a moment of amazed delight, his entire audience burst into howls of laughter. Father was overcome with hilarity, and every time he tried to explain to Lepore, he sank into helpless sobs of laughter. Grandmother and Mamma were holding each other and laughing so hard that tears came down their cheeks. Angeline had turned away and was pounding the dirt. Pinch jumped up and down, yelling. Omachias was laughing for another reason, besides the coincidence, for Crow was near, had survived, and he just might come back some day. Lepore, slowly picking up his things, turned to the laughing family in a state of bewilderment. He put out his hands as though to ask, but then, when Father tried to blubber an explanation only to collapse in fresh laughter, Lepore wiped his hands through the air and scratched his head. This was definitely not the reaction that he had expected. As he walked away, he wondered whether the entire family had eaten some sort of strange medicine, taken leave of their senses, perhaps. He stroked his chin. Yes, he'd sleep on it. Maybe his guardian bird, the crow, would return and speak to him again. Maybe he would have another vision, somehow obtain another answer. Now again it was time for the family to plant. Yellow Kettle chopped at the trough winter-packed earth. Oh, no. Let's try this again. Again, it was time for the family to plant. Yellow Kettle chopped at the tough winter-packed earth of their family garden. And while the others broke dirt clods and struggled with roots, picked stones and smoothed out rough rows to plant, Pinch pretended to help. He kicked at tiny weeds and smoothed circles in the dirt with his hands. He threw mud balls until Yellow Kettle, mother, gave her hoe to him and told him that if he stopped working just once, she would take away all of his play warrior weapons. His lower lip stuck out. He grumbled. As he dug into the earth, he wished that he was a grown man already, with nothing of this sort to bother him. Still, he found himself occasionally dragging buckets of water over to splash on Omakai's planted seeds. His sister even thanked him once, which made him so warm and shivery inside that he had to run and shout louder than ever at completely nothing. The pumpkin seeds were little silver patches like French medals, and grandmother blessed them gently as she pushed them into the soft new earth. The corn seeds were chubby and yellow in Okomayas's fingers. Angeline had acquired these from Fishtail, some corn with red flecks in it, and Mamma put these seeds into the ground with special blessing, curious to see what their growth would bring. The ground harbored the sunshine and spread warmth beneath their feet. As she planted one hill after another, Okomayas felt the calm and sweetness of the earth, and tears burned. Where was Niwu? She missed him. When they had finished planting, as though summoned, rain sprinkled down in a mist. The shower deepened the calm of the woods, tickled the new leaves, lightly wetted the seeds, and sheltered the earth. Suddenly, as they were leaving the field, Crow appeared, wheeling through the air, dive-bombing the family with his familiar caw, caw, caw. Crow swooped near, but refused to land with his usual sweep right onto Omakayas' shoulder. Come, 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 called Omakayas with a thrill of happiness. Pinch, who never was still, never kept himself from excitement, acted differently. He stood motionless and waited right next to his sister. He seemed to know something that Omakayas, in her eagerness to hold her pet, could not grasp. The crow had become half wild, afraid of humans. Omakayas waved and anxious calls were frightening to him. Pinch, on the other hand, actually understood that the quieter he stood, the more likely his old friend was to trust him. And sure enough, the crow did land, right on Pinch's head. Pinch's eyes rolled up. He tried to see the crow. The bird hopped up and down, uttering his greeting, "Craw, craw, craw!" Omakayas was hurt, but instantly, and this was the gesture that forever changed the nature of the friendship between her and her little brother Pinch. He suddenly gently edged next to his sister, and with one short hop, her crow jumped right onto Omakayas' shoulder. In the old days, Pinch would have teased her and made her feel bad because her bird preferred him. Something had changed. "Miigwech, little brother," said Okomayas, surprised to say the word, which was "thank you." Pinch didn't seem to hear. He ran off immediately, shouting his head off. Tears burned in Okomayas' eyes, for as soon as the crow was on her shoulder, he trusted her once more. He pecked at her silver cross, hopped onto her head, gazed at her with the old curious questioning expression of that bird intelligence that he had. Sorry about that. Someone. And as they started back from the field, he rode on her shoulder. Tenderly, as they walked along, the bird excuse me. Tenderly, as they walked back along, the bird plucked up a strand of hair that had fallen loose from Omakayas' braid, and then he tucked it right behind her ear, just as he always had. Now, not long after that, old Tallow brought deer bones to share with Grandma. For a time, the two women sat by the outdoor fire. The air was cool and the fire burned high, stacked with dry wood. Grandmother baked the deer bones, cracked them, and used the special long carved spoons to scoop out the hot pitch marrow from inside the bones, after which grandmother went out to look for Pinch, and Tallow called Omakayas over to sit near the fire with her. "Have some tea," old Tallow said. "I made it fresh." Omakayas shook her head, suspicious. Tallow was behaving in too serious and friendly a manner. Since when did old Tallow make tea? And since when did she act as though she had something important to say? Omakayas tried to slip back into the lodge, but the tough woman seized her hand and bent her fingers around the handle of the cup. She had something in mind in this visit, it was clear, but Omakayas decided that whatever it was, she didn't want to confront it. Ever since she'd had a taste of old Tallow's justice, she'd been wary of the fierce woman, and now, stubborn, Omakayas waited. She felt something flare in her heart. She didn't like to be bossed around. She didn't like it at all. Unwillingly, though, Omakayas accepted a cup and took a sip. "Good. While you're drinking this," said old Tallow, her strong, ropey arms arranged on her knees, her big feet breaking out of her moccasins as usual, that and her hat pulled down low over her fierce eyes, "I'll tell you the story of Okomayas. Maybe that will help. You'll get over your little brother." Okomayas put the cup down, picked it up again, and Tallow's abrupt gesture. All right, I'll drink it. What do you mean, my little brother? Okomayas frowned. What was this, a plan to get her to forget all about Niwu? She wasn't interested. She was sad and loyal to her tiny brother. What did Tallow understand, anyway? Bitterly she spoke. I know the story of Omakayas. It all happened in the winter. She had a beautiful friend, a favorite baby brother. They die. She is left to cry for them. Not that story. Well, what other story do you know about me? She wanted to tell the old woman to let her go, to let her be, to let her go off and hunt, her new her favorite occupation. But because old Tallow was, after all, an elder, and because Mamma had always insisted that Omakayas be polite as possible to all of her elders, Omakayas pretended to listen to the story. When you were very tiny, old Tallow began. What do you mean when I was very tiny? Omakayas tried to be good, but irritation burst out of her. Mamma had me, not you. She held me, fed me, dressed me, all those things. What do you know? What more is there to say? Old Tallow drew a deep breath. Her eyes almost crossed with fury, but she kept her temper. You don't have any excuse to be rude, no matter how sad you are. You can't treat me in a disrespectful way, said old Tallow. Omakayas felt her throat shut with shock and embarrassment. She wanted to cry. Why was she acting like this? Okay then, I'm sorry, she said more softly. What are you going to tell me? Haven't you wondered, said old Tallow, a bit testy with the difficult girl. Hasn't it occurred to you to ask why you didn't get the sickness that the others had? You didn't get sick, said Omakayas, stubborn. I never get sick, said Tallow. Grandmother stayed well. Your grandmother already had the smallpox. Omakayas remembered the tiny white pit in the skin of her grandmother's cheek, but was still surprised to hear that grandmother, too, had suffered from the disease. She pondered for a moment and then could not hide her curiosity. What about me? She demanded, as abrupt as old Tallow was herself. Now, I'm going to stop here for a second, children. Can you think of why Omakayas might not have had smallpox? I want you to think all the way back to the beginning of the story and see if you can make a connection. Okay, let's read on. What about me? She demanded, abrupt as old Tallow herself. You too. Me too what? You too had this scratching disease. A panicky feeling bubbled up inside Omakayas, and she wanted to laugh to drive the feeling off. I couldn't have had it. You wouldn't remember exactly what happened because you were a baby. Then why didn't Mama have it? Why didn't Mama get sick, too, this time? Because, said old Tallow, you weren't with your Mama then. Omakayas wanted to stop talking. She could feel it. There was something else, something coming toward her, something deeper and huger that she didn't want to know. She tried to stop herself from asking the next question, but her curiosity was just too great. She felt her voice rise. Where was I? You were on a different island, said old Tallow. Her voice was stern, but there was an ache in her look that Omakayas had never seen before. An island called Spirit Island, where everyone but you died of the itching disease. You were the toughest one, the littlest one, and you, Omakayas, you survived them all. Tallow smiled. Starvation nearly got you next, but I managed to cheat that old hungry skull. Fed you broth of rabbits, brought you back with me. This was before you were 2 winters old, my girl, before you said words yet, before you can remember anything. Omakayas' mind tried to grasp what she was hearing. Her heart tumbled into darkness, and she could not speak, and now the line was crossed. She had to know everything. Mama? Father? Grandmother? They took you as their daughter, loved you as their daughter. You are a daughter to them, and a sister to your brother and to Angeline. You? Well, why did you give me away? Blurted Omakayas. Old Tallow glared away into the distance. Count yourself lucky that I did. What kind of life would it have been with an old bear hunter like Tallow? Nobody has ever stayed with old Tallow. She drives them off, eh? The two sat together for a long, long time. There at the fire with the darkness gathering above them, and to all sides Old Tallow made a move to leave, but Omicaya said, her voice strange and hollow and small, "Please, don't go." Inside she knew that there was something still to ask, something about the story which seemed to be unbelievable and perfectly understandable all at once, but she couldn't put it into words. Tallow went on speaking. "I know now the reason you were sent to Yellow Kettle, and to the old woman, and to your father and brothers," said Tallow. She rustled in the tatters of her dress, groped for her smoking pipe, and then remembered that she was out of tobacco, and let her hands splay restlessly in her lap. "You were sent here so you could save the others," she said. "Because you'd had the sickness, you were strong enough to nurse them through it. They did a good thing when they took you in and saved them from their and you saved them from for their good act. And now that circle that began when I found you is complete." Omachias knew the question that she needed to ask. She took a deep breath and asked it. "Found me? How did you find me? How did you know I was there unless you were on that island, unless you too survived the sickness?" Now old Tallow fell silent, and in her thoughts Omachias could tell there was some unwillingness, something she did not want to say, but she shrugged eventually and told it right out. "There was a canoe of men, my husband, Hat, among them. They passed by Spirit Island. They saw the dead. Saw you. So it was they who brought me back." "No," said Tallow. "They saw me," said Omachias, making sure, "but they didn't save me?" Old Tallow shook her head in the dust, and then she shook herself all over, just like one of the dogs. My husband Hat was a fearful fool. I was going to put his things out on the door anyway, when he told me that he and the other men had seen you and gone, leaving you." Old Tallow's voice was angry. "I made him leave. 'Don't show me your face ever,' I said to him, and then I took my canoe over to that island." The wintry trees clacked their branches, ticking and moaning. The wind picked up often at dusk on the island. Omachias could feel in her heart what it was like for that baby, for herself, all alone with the dead, with her mother, walking from those she loved as though walking from stone to stone. Somehow deep inside she remembered. "It was spring," she said softly. "Spring." "Yes," said old Tallow in surprise, peering closely at her. "Do you remember?" "The birds," said Omachias. "I remember the birds, the songs of the birds." "Ah!" Tallow was excited. "I'd forgotten myself. There were birds on that island, singing so prettily and so loudly, too small to eat. The little birds with white throats, those sweet spring cries. Ay, my little girl, you remember them." "They kept me alive," said Omachias to herself, not quite understanding the words. "I remember their song, because their song was my comfort. It was my lullaby. The birds, they kept me alive." Omachias woke to a piercing spring music the next morning. It was morning, and it was the very same song she remembered from the other island, so very long ago. This morning in a tree near the Birchbarck house she heard the white-throated sparrows calling out to one another. "Where are you going?" Angelina asked sleepily. "Out," said Omachias. "Ugh," said Pinch, as she stepped over him and out into the fresh dawn. The sun was just peeping out over the water, its light winking and growing. All around her there sounded voices of hundreds of white-throated sparrows, and in the mild air of spring they were singing cheerfully, sweetly, as though to keep her company on the first morning of her life, that she, Omachias, knew the truth of her past now. She was the girl from Spirit Island. She lived in a birchbark house. This was the first day of the journey on which she would find the truth of her future. Who she was, singing, the little birds told her something more. Their delicate song surrounded her, running in waves through the leafless trees. Omachias walked toward the strongest center of their music, and then, on a patch of thawed grass ground, she lay back in the sun, her head against the bark of a fallen tree. The birds, the whole earth, the expectant woods seemed to wait for her to understand something. She didn't know what. It didn't matter. Drowsily she whistled along with the tiny sparrows. Those sweet, tiny, far-reaching notes were so brave. The little birds called out repeatedly in the cold dawn, and all of a sudden, Omachias heard something new in their voices. She heard Niwu. She heard her little brother as though he still existed in this world. She heard him tell her to cheer up and live. I'm all right, his voice said. I am in a peaceful place. You can depend on me. I am always here to help you, my sister. Omacaius tucked her hands behind her head, lay back, closed her eyes, and smiled as the song of the white-throated sparrow sang again and again through the air, like a shining needle, and sewed up her broken heart. Oh my gosh. What a great ending to the story. So I was thinking that the chapter is called the full circle, and I thought it was like the full circle of the year, and I suppose that it could mean that, but it kind of means the full circle of her life, right? So she was left in that island because those people had all died of smallpox, right? And now we know how Tallow came to get her, and the story really does make connections. So, my sweet children, you must know that Native American people believe that everything in life is connected, and that there is reason for everything. And so the reason for Omacaius was so that she could keep her people strong and save them in their time of need. But it seems like she's got some other gifts as well. And it seems like nature was there to help her and save her. And she was there to save her people. And they are connected with one another. So it was quite a beautiful story. So you might get this book online and read it again if you wish. It's just such a great book. She writes other stories as well, and I've read other ones that she's written about Native American children growing up during the time before there was a lot of settling of the white people. And I think you might really enjoy some of her books. So I hope you go online and check that out. Now, remember to read, read, read. The more you read, the more you know. So I love you all. What a great end to this book. Have a fabulous summer.